Hello everyone, I'm a concert pianist Timofey Kazantsev. I'm also a teacher. And just 2 days ago, on Friday, my student played Clara Schumann impromptu for me. And she complained to me, what's wrong? When I play on my piano at home, I'm much better than in your class. Everything here is very rigid, awkward, and unattractive. And that's true. I practiced so many times at home on my old Soviet piano, and then I would come to the conservatory, to the apartment, to the big concert grand piano, and I was really bad at it. What if I told you that your old Soviet piano is much more suited to this music than the new concert grand? To which you will reply, of course not. The thing is, I'm untalented and I can't play the music the way it deserves to be played. Okay, forget it. And if I say that when Chopin writes the symbol pedal, it means you have to press the pedal. And when Chopin writes an asterisk, that means that you have to release the pedal. I think you'll tell me this. Come on, Timothy. No, where is written that a composer should write in the notes what the performer should do? No, wait. You'll probably say something else. You'll just say to me, Timothy, you just didn't play enough Chopin and never tried to play it with the pedal that Chopin writes, right? And that's exactly the point. I really haven't played much Chopin. Very little. And to be honest, in the 25 years that I've been playing the piano, I've never played Chopin with the pedal that Chopin wrote. Let's give it a try. Fuck this! Well, talking seriously, with this pedal, with the pedal on the first beat and lifting the pedal on the third beat, we usually play it as a delayed pedal, right? And in some sense, we never play this pedal exactly as Chopin wrote it. I'll try to play it with the way you usually play it. Here I replace the pedal for not having the dirty harmony. All of this. And here will be also a lot of pedal. I will be using the pedal every 2 notes in the right hand. So that on the one hand leaves this pedal hour, and on the other hand not to pollute the sound with all these ugly half tones. And I'm not the only one, right? If we go to the classical music online, Valse number 7 in C sharp minor, Dmitry Alexeyev. Delayed pedal and 3 pedals on each beat. This one was a bit longer. Okay, let's find someone else. Claudio Arau, the year 79. The same pedal. Vladimir Ashkenazy, the year 77, London. The same pedal. Oh, and there is no pedal at all, while Chopin asks you to press the pedal on every bar. Хотя, the year 14. Very interesting. On the contrary, there is almost no pedal. At least it's much less than Chopin writes. So should be there less or more of it? And most importantly, if you press the pedal as Chopin writes, let's take another look. At some point there will be gaps. And at some point there will be have a swamp. And at some point it will be completely dry and abrupt. Damn, did you hear this? If this pedal doesn't sound, then why does Chopin write it? Maybe Chopin just mistaken, he just wrote it inaccurately. Maybe he wanted to write an asterisk in this place and the pedal further away, but he just couldn't write it that way. That could happen, right? What about this bar then? Why is no pedal in this bar? Maybe he just forgot to write it down, but we need to write it again, and asterisks. Well, for sound in the same, these are two identical bars, right? So in this bar, I'm actually believing him that he's swimming. And for not flowing in the pedal, he holds the bass with his hand and plays an expressive melody. Maybe it's worth pressing the pedal a little here. And again, we have all this. How could Chopin write something like this? Traditionally, since the beginning of the 20th century, even since the last quarter of the 19th century, pianists answer this question as follows. Chopin does not write the pedal to press. Chopin writes a recommendation. He writes the pedal symbol where it should be pressed, and it's important to him that the bass is under the pedal. And he puts an asterisk there just to show that this pedal may need to be cleared. But even this interpretation leaves many questions unanswered. And as you have may noticed, many pianists use this pedal more often than Chopin wrote in some places, and much longer than written by Chopin in other places. Starting sometime in May of this year, I started studying Chopin's music. For the very first time, I'm preparing a large concert program, which will include all 4 ballads, the second sonata, and several miniatures. And I came to this program on the one hand from the music of the late Romantics, Rachmaninoff, Scriabin, those who do not write Педаль into their notes because it's intuitively understood. There are basses, there is harmony. It's a creative process of what you want to show in the texture. And I also came after the program with Beethoven's music. Beethoven, who was a stickler for detail and really wrote down almost everything. And so, looking at Chopin's original manuscripts, looking at Chopin's autographs, I noticed more and more that in terms of the level of literalism, detail of his scores, Chopin was much closer to Beethoven's scores. But I couldn't get over the fact that the pedal, written by Chopin, was completely illogical. I could accept that Chopin was writing the pedal schematically to some extent, until I began to encounter more and more examples where this pedal was really appropriate and interesting. Let's not stray too far from the valse genre and take the brilliant valse opus 18. I look at the score and I have a feeling that Chopin only wrote down the pedal that was important to him. But at the same time, if you play this pedal literally, it doesn't raise any questions for me. Here, apparently, it was not important for him to indicate the pedal. He just thought, as I think, that a pianist with a good intuition would press the pedal anyway. Look, I just pressed the pedal exactly as Chopin requested. I take it on the bass, which sounds very rich and full. Then I release it on a third beat, but it doesn't sound hollow, because the right hand keeps this sound at the end of the bar and connects it to the first beat of the next bar, which explodes with a new, strong beat. And then contrast. Now there is a pause between the beats, which lightens the texture. And here, apparently, Chopin considered that he had already explained how to press the pedal, and there was no need to write it down. I am quite satisfied with this interpretation. Moreover, it's very accurate and very virtuosic and filigree. Not every composer would plan and add small crescendos, then diminuendo, It is truly delicious, filigree, brilliant, and inventive. If Chopin managed to record it so accurately, such interesting pedaling, the play of volume, meter, and melodic lines, with such simple and, it would seem, standard pedal for Chopin, which ends on the third beat, perhaps he was just as precise in other places. That is, for some time I began to adhere this point of view, that Chopin writes down the pedal very accurately. He just doesn't write down everything but only what seems important to him, and I can fill in everything else. For example, the fourth ballad. It would be important for him to connect the beginning of this measure, and then I can understand for myself when I need the pedal and when I don't. I'm a musician after all, and I have ears. And probably here, right? Maybe here another pedal. Also, this seems a bit over the top. After all, he wrote two pedals in the same measure. Perhaps he did mean that pedal needs to be removed. And in principle, it even sounds right. But just a couple of lines later, I start to wonder at what scales I can complement the pedal. Well, here, the pedal is probably already complete. And I need, just like in the brilliant Valse, Opus 18, to release the pedal between the bar lines. This is something that I don't really like anymore. But I can still imagine how to play it as Chopin wrote it down. So wait, what with this bar? There are two indications to press the pedal and one pause of 1/8. Well, obviously Chopin wants this harmony to be connected and vibrate. This is very beautiful, I like it. Does it mean that I can get another pedal here? Or still not? And yet, what should we do with these repeats of E flat? I can't say I like the way it sounds without pedal. Probably I will decide like this. It's important to Chopin that I play the bass on the new pedal. That's why he always writes the asterisk first. And that's why he always writes the pedal on the downbeat, because it's important to him that the bass is voluminous and excites many strings. And then I can press the pedal a little earlier. And preserve Chopin's idea with bass and the hole between the last beat and the bass. But this place is still unclear to me. And so, step by step, I tried to adapt Chopin's notation to something that makes sense to me. But the further I go, the more difficult it becomes for me to find the meaning in this pedaling, the more it seems to me inaccurate and sometimes even illogical. At some point, I simply decided that there was something systematically wrong with Chopin's pedal notation. And yet, all the pianists of the 20th century are not fools, and they quite rightly ignored many of his instructions. That was until I started working with Clara Schumann's piano works, and did not find there the same pedalization patterns that Chopin had. Let's look at Clara Schumann's impromptu, which at the beginning is very similar to pedal of Chopin's valses. It sounds a little dry, but overall I can imagine that I will learn it and do it as interesting and beautiful as, say, I showed in a big, brilliant valse. Well, look, let's say it's the next part, and here something just as strange happens with the pedal as in Chopin's music. empty, dirty. Dirty again. The contrast between the emptiness of the pedal and the dirtiness of the pedal is so striking, and is literally within the space of one bar. She asks to play legato here, but how can you play legato with your fingers if there is interval of decima? Again, it sounds clean, but it's still very, very dry. It lacks that romantic piano aura. I am even ready to believe that if I press the pedal now as my ears want, I will be able to keep this long pedal and little dirt at the end of the bars, as Clara asks. You must admit it sounds nicer this way, so it seems that I was wrong and this pedal is not so accurate. Then it should express the composer's intention to connect something or to emphasize. And just when I thought I understood how to work with this pedal, I immediately encounter some example that completely destroys my ideas about it. My ideas about pedaling, the pedal notations of Chopin, Clara Schumann, Brahms seem to be erroneous. I have to rewatch them all the time. I just couldn't understand how it was the different composers of the same era, completely different from my ideas about pedal notation. I am far from the only one asking this question. Nowadays, even on YouTube, you can find several speakers who answer this question differently. For example, Mihail Arkadьев, a Russian pianist and conductor, a highly respected musician, if we sum, answers this question like this. In romantic music, from Chopin to at least Grieg, and most likely to Scriabin and Rachmaninoff, we assume that the pedal is always pressed, and we look for those moments when we can no longer hold the pedal. So he stands for that romantic sound is exceptionally long and voluminous, and to satisfy this lengthy sound, some dissonances appear which sound quite bold and brave. Quite often lately I have met pianists who answer this question the same way. If we return to our waltz, it would probably sound like this. Press the pedal before the performance begins. And if something seems too dirty, let's say this bar, then this is solved by working with dynamics. I've just played each subsequent note noticeably louder. And thus I was rather making a cushion of sound of which the melody emerges. Actually, you don't have to look far. I talked about this method in my first video about the pedal. There is another approach to radically reducing the pedal. The main YouTube speaker of this is Anniki Gёtler. Let's listen to what she has to say on this topic.
So rest or silence is like the most important thing in music, because this is the time in between the notes. This is where you can create relaxation or tension or both simultaneously. If you look closely, Chopin wrote no pedal for the measures 52 to 53. By the way, that's actually very interesting, because later when the theme comes again, he is writing a pedal. Now that's, to me, not an accident that he didn't write it for the first time, but for the other two times he wrote it extra. And then also, as soon as you start to dance together with the left hand as well, we have a very special kind of pedaling. If you look closely, Chopin writes that you have to take the pedal off on the rest. It will never sound like this whole pedal through round sound that most of the people are playing in this case. I think it sounds so much more interesting and so much more like a dance if you actually take off the pedal there.
Let's try to look at this fragment again together in Jan Ekier's urtext. I like it a little more than Paderewski edition, but overall the pedal's character is the same. The one more thing that I see here is the same legato that was in Valse Opus 18. That's if I played left hand. I would try to find a way to somehow connect this last beat and the bass. Do you remember the solution I came to in the fourth ballade? I pressed the pedal a little earlier when I couldn't reach it with my hands. But the most important thing, of course, is the right hand, which should everything connect very beautifully. And now I will play with both hands slowly enough to feel all the connections. Do you notice? If you don't bother with the idea of playing everything dryly, to be puzzled by the idea of melody, connection not only with the pedal but also with fingers, connection not only with pedal but also with intonations, then the music starts to be much more interesting, and it has many more timbres compared to the version which is more like Michail Arkadyev's approach. Press the pedal, also seems to me much more interesting and rich than the option that removes the pedal as much as possible. I would highlight the following weaknesses in Anniki's approach. I don't think you should take the pedal off before it's written down. Anniki actually takes it off on the fourth eighth, not the fifth. Thus, she shortens the harmony, melodies, and meter too much, so that instead of 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2, we have 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. If we consider not just these two lines that we have analyzed, I don't understand how the following two lines could be subtracted from this analysis. In them, the pedal is taken not just for more than one bar, but also violates the metric organization that Annika just spoke about. Generally speaking, in the interpretation of Chopin's Annika Pedal, I noticed the same problems that have been bothering me since May, for more than 6 months now. And frankly speaking, I already began to doubt that I would find answers to these questions, and that it makes sense to look for some answers in them. However, two things happened at once. Firstly, a piano master from the Bechstein Zentrum in Leipzig came to visit us. In addition to our concerns about this concert grand piano, which requires a complete maintenance, we were also concerned about the fate of the old Viennese grand piano. So I was sure that the leather with which the felts from the hammers was covered and the condition of damper system is a state of extreme wear. However, this tuner told me that the leather and also the condition of the damper system is a design feature of the piano, and that's how it should sound. Yes, there are some defects, yes, the felt is tired, yes, the dampers are tired, but in principle it works more or less as intended. And for me this was completely new information. For the first time I looked at the problem from the angle of the instrument. Perhaps it's not my interpretation of the recording of Chopin, Schumann and Brahms that is wrong. But the instrument I play is so radically different from the instruments on which this music was written that I can't even imagine how the music would sound on them if I used the pedal exactly as it written by Chopin, Schumann or Brahms. And with this new insight, I took my students and went to Zwickau, to the Robert Schumann house, where we spent many hours talking with its director Mr. Sinovchik and also playing historical instruments there. The main historical instrument there is a restored grand piano of Wilhelm Wieck, Clara Schumann's cousin, with patented Blüthner action. And it turned out that indeed, the character of the sound, the touch, the length of the cantilena, everything is different on these pianos. Even without a pedal, these pianos have an aura that connects the sounds together. You can repeat the notes and melody, and instead of identical notes, hear how the sound evolves, how it connects. For this effect you don't need to press anything or apply any special effort. On the other hand, I found that by pressing the pedal the way Chopin or Clara intended, I had to change my fingering. I have to rely on finger legato, I have to rely on the intonations and polyphony that I can hold in my hands. We left Schumann house with the understanding that the romantic pedal, where it's written, is strictly instructive, and that it's possible to play entire Chopin's cadences without touching the pedal. Or, on the other hand, that one can play and layer several different harmonies on top of each other without losing the purity and timbre and harmony. But this magic of instructive pedaling, the pedal that these composers intended, works only on the instruments that it was written on. And in order to perform this music on our modern instruments, pedaling will be adapted one or other way. In some places, it really should be longer and wetter than written, and in others perhaps drier and cleaner. The problem is that a modern pianist and practicing on a modern piano and simply looking at the notes will never guess how it should sound on romantic instrument. And that was the next problem I had to solve. And this thought led me to this piano. The piano that had been standing in our music school for about 2 years. Nobody used it because it was very strange, not tuned and not adjusted. And since it was the best candidate to become a rehearsal instrument for the Chopin program, I spent more than months to fix it. By the way, there is a separate video about this on the channel. So let's try to play on this grand piano the same Chopin waltz with the same original pedal and listen to what comes out of it. You know, I don't think it's perfect, but at least we can work with it now. And by the way, this bar that was completely without pedal, there is a good contrast between them and other one with a pedal. Then I start asking myself the question, what about the dynamics? Should I make more crescendo here? How long should I leave my hands on the third beat? All these questions that shape the already interesting musical version. And having started to practice on this piano, I came to the model of the work that my professor Mary Lebenzon had advised me. She advised to always start with the left hand. The point is that the left hand organizes music both metrically and harmonically. So, creating the musical left hand is actually much more important than the creating something interesting with the right hand. And the further I dived into the notes and scores of Chopin's, the more I became convinced that all his pedaling was directly connected to the left hand. Very little pedal helps in any way to express anything in the right hand. Most of it relates specifically to the left hand, to the harmonic and metric organization. So let's try playing the left hand. look, I still had to adapt the left hand to that. The left hand sounded much more beautiful. This is, after all, an instrument that is noticeably different from the instruments on which Chopin wrote his music. This is not a Pleyel or a Rar from the mid-19th century, but rather a Vincent Oizer, a Viennese grand piano from the late 19th century. On the one hand, it's much more melodious, on the other hand, it's somewhat more concrete in his sound. So, what have I did? I added a little pedal to C sharp in the non-pedal measure. And I feel the need to play legato with my fingers. In general, this technique of connecting notes with the fingers, the technique that we use a lot in Bach's fugues, for some reason I almost never use it in romantic music. And only now I'm starting to develop my hands for the real finger legato, for playing complex polyphony, complex romantic polyphony, without using a pedal. And I must say this is not a very simple process. You have to think about where to place the weight of your hand, which fingers repeat the note, which connect them. Well, that's easy, but this requires at least some thinking about how to play it. And having found this left-hand music, I can finally start working with the right. In the right hand, fingered legato is even more important. Look, even at the very beginning. Replace the first finger with the second. I begin to look for the dynamics, agogics, intonations that will reveal the entire musical concept. Completely with the author's pedal. Let us do the same work with a fragment from the third ballad that we have already worked with. But before that, let's talk about a few important things. Anniki Gёtler video wasn't the only one that caught my attention, while I was tackling Pedalin issues. At the same time, our small music community was blown away by Ben Lauder's video, The Most Misunderstood Symbol in Music. This video is about hairpins, crescendo and diminuendo. It is essentially a discussion of the book, The Secret Life of Musical Notation by American pianist Roberto Poli. This discussion takes place with the author and the pianist Seymour Bierstein. In this book, the author tries to give the explanation of the seemingly illogical placement of musical symbols by authors of the past, mainly from the classical and romantic periods. My wife Alona decided that I should definitely read it and ordered it, for which I am very grateful to her. In addition to hairpins, the book examines sforzando, rinforzando, stretta, rhythmic organization of the text and the pedal. The chapter on the pedal is built entirely around Chopin's music, and even on the cover there is an introduction from Chopin's Barcarolla. Roberto Poli, using numerous examples, referring to autographs and recordings of various performers, once again answers all these questions that worried me when I was working on this program of Chopin's works. When discussing the pedal, Roberto Poli notices a certain regularity in Chopin's pedal notation, and he begins to draw a line between pedaling, which separates the bars, and the late one, which he calls syncopated pedal. To be honest, when I read this term in English, syncopated pedal, I wasn't quite sure that I understood it correctly. And when I started working with octographs myself, I began to notice that Chopin often writes the pedal before the bar line, placing it directly below the pedal release symbol. And this began to prompt me to think that perhaps in Chopin's music, as well as the music of other romantics, not only the delayed pedal is acceptable, but also the leading one. This is a fragment from the first ballad, and let's try to play it now, first with a pedalization that breaks the bar lines, then with a delayed pedal, and then with leading one. Now the delayed pedal. You feel that on this grand piano, and in fact it was also on the piano in the Schumann house, a delayed pedal adds far more mood than it does to tie bars together. Now I will change the pedal immediately after I have taken the third beat off, but at the same time I will leave the last part of the melody on the new pedal. Of course, this use of the pedal is not justified everywhere, but nevertheless, when I come across such designations, I begin to think about it. I looked through various urtexts and found the edition that satisfies me the most. This is the last Polish urtext of the Chopin Institute of Music, which was worked by Jan Ekier and Paweł Kamiński. It somehow most closely graphically corresponds to the character of Chopin's autographs. In general, creating an urtext of Chopin's work is an incredibly difficult task. The thing is, there were even several manuscripts. One manuscript was authored by Chopin. It was not always the most complete, because Chopin had the opportunity to work directly with the publisher in Paris and correct something at the publication process. The other two copies were made by his composer friends. One copy was sent to Leipzig and other to London. And as a rule, these three copies are quite noticeably different, and therefore, comparing the first Paris edition and the first Leipzig edition, we find there completely different musical texts. This is the edition of Paris. Remember that Annika points out that the pedal is taken off here. However, there is also no pedal release symbol. In this place, the pedal release symbol falls on the bass, just as played by Annika, but it changes its position depending on the bar. If we look at the Leipzig edition, it was made from the handwritten copy by Saint-Saëns. Here, the pedal is taken on the chord, taken off on octaves, and then taken off almost always on the fourth 8th note in the bar. In the surviving manuscript, the pedal is placed very unevenly. In the beginning, it stands on bass on A flat major, then it's taken off on octaves, and then it falls on the fourth 8th note, then it falls on the fifth 8th note, then it falls almost on the sixth 8th. And I question myself how accurate this notation is. And in this matter, I still decide to trust the latest urtext more. It's the most musical, logical, and removes many questions that we might have. Let's go over our practicing model again. We take the left hand and turn it into interesting music. Mezzo voce, we start on the left pedal. I'll try to add the right hand. There I will do the same thing that I did in the Waltz Opus 18. I will connect the third 8 with the first with a beautiful legato. Look how many nuances there and how the pedal breathes, plays with the volume and sound. It's not just push the pedal on the first 8 note and release it on the 4th, on the 5th. Some harmonies are maintained here. Into the next measure, which layered on top of them. There is a pause somewhere before the next measure. And somewhere very soft legato. And somewhere it starts to continue to a rather stormy and daring story. That's why it seems to me that a pianist who wants to really understand this music and who wants to find their own individual sound, in general to understand how Chopin heard what he wrote down, one cannot do without such an instrument. Of course, this Viennese piano is also an approximation. I adapt my pedal in one way or other to what I hear. In general, the point of my research is not to find some single correct pedalization or some single correct interpretation. No, and among other things, because Chopin did not write down the entire pedal, at least sometimes in his autographs, Chopin leaves the last line unfilled with pedalization. Also, it's quite obvious that there is a pedal here. Sometimes the pedal that Chopin reads is not enough for a good sound, and in any case, I'm sure he meant for his music to be played by a musician with ears on his head. And yet, what should an ordinary pianist do who doesn't even have a grand piano like this? I recently launched an experiment. I started to play and record Chopin's first ballad on different instruments. I recorded it on this instrument, in our small hall on Yamaha Concert Grand Piano, in my classroom on Yamaha Baby Grand. I also recorded it on electric piano and on an old brown upright from the GDR. And I must say that upright from the GDR, substitute any old Soviet one, old Czech one, the touch conveys this character very well. They don't have as strong cantilena as modern pianos, and at the same time they don't have such strong damper, especially on old instruments. And so perhaps on such uprights the effect will be even a little bit closer to that what we will hear on romantic grand pianos than on this one. But still here is a grand piano action, let alone Viennese, that's why I mostly do my work on it. But still, let's listen to how this music will sound on the upright. So, let's summarize my approach to work. What I have come to over the past 6 months, working with Chopin, with Clara Schumann, with Fanny Mendelssohn. I'm sure it will be the same for Robert Schumann and von Brahms, and most likely for Schubert and many other romantic composers. A good urtext is needed. In case of Chopin, this is urtext of Jan Ekier and Pavel Kaminsky. You need an instrument like an instruments of the period you are working with. In my case, it's a Venus grand piano. It could be an old upright. It could be, if you are lucky, a romantic, a real historical instrument that you will work with. You have to be ready to work with your fingers, to connect the music with your fingers. Sometimes play without a pedal at all, using only your fingers. Let's look at some examples. For example, it never occurred to me that you could play the beginning of the third ballad without touching the pedal at all. Did you feel this effect? And there really is a lot of such work. In the fourth ballad, you can watch a video of my practicing. Once you have found a good urtext, it would be a good idea to take a pencil, find an autograph, in the case of Chopin is this website, and you can go through the entire piece, having looked at what catches your eye in the autograph, what you would like to transfer to your score. A huge role is played by dynamics and agogics. Sometimes it sounds dirty solely because dynamics and agogic are used incorrectly. One of my favorite examples is an impromptu of Clara Schumann. And the most important thing, of course, is not I'm doing this all in order to express the composer's thoughts as accurately as possible, or to match the style as closely as possible, but to breathe with music and to find some meaning in these pets and asterisks that these composers placed over 200 years ago, in order to find your own voice, your individuality, in this music and in this style. But still, it seems important to me to turn to primary sources, to instruments with similar sound to what these composers heard. Because in the end, we play as we were talking, and with the composer, and with the audience, and with those people who once listened to it, to understand in general who we are and find our place in this world. And the last question that remains. So we found the instruments, we found the urtext, found the right pedal. So now what? Play exclusively on these instruments and not use the modern pianos at all? To be honest, I have the desire. I have a desire not to play Chopin's music on a modern Steinway. But let's be honest, it's impossible to avoid modern grand pianos in large concert halls. That's why I'm working here to create a soundscape in which I will be. And in each specific hall and in each specific instrument, I will implement it as my ears tell me to. Of course, they will guide me based on this experience, based on experience that I had in this classroom. Let's hear how I do on the concert grand piano after I worked on these pieces on a historical instrument. 1 month later. Over the past months, I have played several concerts, including a waltz and ballads of Chopin, and I played several pieces by Grieg, my wife Alona, and I recorded a short program of songs by Fanny Mendelssohn and Clara Schumann at the Robert Schumann House in Zwickau. And frankly speaking, I have a lot to add. And besides, I would like to give a little criticism of the approach that I have just told you. First of all, I would like to answer the question I have not raised yet. What about the delayed pedal? Should I just not press it at all? No, I wouldn't say that. Yes, that's right, everything that was told about the direct pedal, about that Chopin takes the direct pedal into account to a large extent when he plans his texture, but it seems to me that there is still a place for a delayed pedal in this music. It just seems to me that the delayed pedal in principle is not very typical for Chopin. However, we are always solving a creative problem. We are performers, interpreters, artists, and let's say here, in the second ballad, at the beginning of the second ballad, I hear this repeating ostinatos, first on C and then on other harmonies. Like a peculiar bell strike. And this bell, on the one hand, it's a tribute to some tradition and tranquility. On the other hand, this bell will also borrow the idea of pastoral, of a serene life. Here it seems to me quite appropriate, instead of breaking these harmonies from the very beginning, give a small period of delayed pedal which will connect these harmonies much more. And in principle, all romantic music, the story with the romantic pedal is a question of maintaining the harmony. The pedal is tightly linked to the harmonic progression of the piece. And so here, it seems to me it's quite logical to start the delayed pedal, which will connect these harmonies and will not interfere with the articulation of the melody. Gradually moving to a finger legato. Again, pressing the direct pedal here is my creative choice, because at first I tried to play it without a pedal at all. But it seems to me that this disrupted the harmony and tranquility of this pastoral. And I continue the same waltz pedal. I leave the pedal on the third beat, press it on the first beat, and I have the opportunity to use the first beat on the pedal in order to adapt the position of my hand, move it. Now, for example, I'm preparing my hands to connect the third beat and the first with my fingers. This is the story of the delayed pedal in the second ballad. There are several other places for it. Basically, when you feel like you are not connecting enough, why not? Now to the other question. What to do with those fragments where the pedal is not notated or written? Let's look at the song of Clara Schumann. In some places, like the introduction, it seems unnecessary. And then look, just like the later romantics, Clara notates that these long notes are important to her. And the direct pedal is very well suited to this type of connection. Again, no pedal needed. Maybe a little bit. A direct pedal that gives a volume to these chords. Again, no pedal needed. Everything is made by fingers.
Das ist ein Tag der Gegenwart. Die Wacht erschlägt den Chor. Die Lerche jauchzt mit Jubelschlag, wohl überm grünen Hag. Der Jäger bläst ins Rohr.
Another important question, how far does this stylistic feature extend? This pedaling focused towards finger legato, focused on the direct pedal with minimal involvement of the delayed pedal. And even if months ago I answered this question to myself like this, that Grieg, the next generation of romantics, is already different instruments and different pedal. Now, I'm not so sure about this. Let's say you can find a recording of Grieg's melody on my channel, which is completely consistent with Michail Arkadyev's idea of how a high romantic pedal should work. However, after working with Chopin's second ballade, I couldn't help but notice the striking similarity between these two textures. And moreover, if we look at the fingering, fifth to third, here below on the last note of the accompaniment, before the change of harmony, the left hand takes the bass with the fourth to play the next bass with the fifth. 4 fingers to the next bass with the fifth. The fourth is played with the second finger, then changed to the first in order to move into the next fifth. The same in the right hand. Melody constantly takes care that it can play legato between the last 8 notes of the previous measure and the first note of the next measure. Fifth to third, first to second. And this gave me the idea that in Grieg's melody the pedal should be almost identical to Chopin's. I guess it's only a little bit longer, right? It seems to me that for every composer you need to find a piece of or work which will serve as a key to understanding his style. For Grieg, it seems to me that the key to understanding his style is this piece, Towards Spring, Opus 43, number 6. What's interesting here? Look at this pedal. It's absolutely Chopin-like, where you need to play legato with a pure, soulful melody. There is no pedaling. This is played by fingers. Also, it's now being played on pianissimo. Even these chords, which in most cases will be played by pianist on the pedal, are supposed, apparently, because the pedal here is written in the great detail from beginning to the end, be played without. And this also dictates us the movement of this piece quite fast. And do you know what this manner of performing Greek reminds me of? How these lyric pieces were recorded by Alexander Gellenweser. My professor Mary Liebenzon often said that the old man played dryly and quickly, and that her pianism is quite different from Gellenweser's. And now I understand the reasons, apparently, and the nature of these differences. Yes, the first horse on the pedal, but then pedal is Greeks. Even faster than I play. Here he added a little of his own. And now look, the second time, Gellenweser plays on a much longer pedal. This solution is similar to the one I came to. And the reason why I played the pedal longer the second time is, this is because dynamics are important for Greek. Pianissima, touching and dry, forte, vete. Look, as soon as forte appears, the pedal lengthens. And this is especially noticeable with the following pages. Here is piano. And on the chords, the pedal is being taken off to give a beautiful legato and soulful melody. And on the next page, on forte, the pedal is lengthened. Also, another reason to take this pedal literally is that Greek writes grace notes in precisely those places in which grace notes should connect the melodic line without the pedal in the left hand. Here is upcoming pedal. Here is direct. And again direct. But as we add dynamics, a pedal starts to be longer. No more taking offs. A full cushion of the pedal, and the role of the delayed pedal will be played by this grace note. And now pay attention. For the first time in this piece, pedal appears without an asterisk, which is completely different from this connection of measures. This is where the pedal is delayed. Greek writes it out. And now, direct. And what I like about this discovery is that it fits into my feeling that I expressed in the last video about the pedal, that the amount of the pedal we use gradually increases from era to era. And it's not that for me Chopin's music somehow abruptly shifts to wide pedalization, but now this transition seems to me much more systematic and interesting from a musical standpoint. And I don't know whether I'll say this for the second or the third time, but this is no way a dogma or not a guide. This is an offer to hear a different musical picture, to hear a picture that is much more soulful and pure. I am very concerned about the poster postulates. This is how it should be done, this is how it should not be done, this is how it should be played like this, but shouldn't be played like this. When music is so diverse and each performer finds in this music the idea that is close to him and the idea that the composer himself would not have heard in his work. Another thing, of course, is that the closer we are to the musical text, the more our idea, as it were, fits like a good coat onto the skeleton given to us by the composer. But just the other day, I listened to my professor, Mary Lebenson's interpretation of the fourth ballad. I was amazed by both the technique and the depth of this performance. Moreover, Mary Simchovna's approach to the pedal, to the sound of the music, is completely different from what I have found to myself now. I never cease to admire what she discovered and found in this ballad. How many colors and emotions and intonations she brings there. And to reach this level of mastery of this piece, I still need to play more than one and probably more than 10 concerts with this ballad until I'm truly, completely free in it. And it's not just I will know every note, but rather look at it from all possible sides and dimensions. And this is just one of the dimensions which I hope will reveal many interesting things to you. As in the music of the first wave for romantics, Liszt, Chopin, Schumann, and Clara Schumann, and Fanny Mendelssohn, many more, Schubert in my opinion, and Brahms, and Mendelssohn of course, and in the following generation of composers who really stood on the shoulders first and foremost probably of Chopin, which opened up a vast abyss of colors and possibilities for our new instrument, Chopin's instruments at the time. Well, I say goodbye to you. Thank you so much for spending this incredibly long time with me. I would be very glad to receive your criticism, comments and remarks, because these are the thoughts which I have been practically alone with for the last 6 months, and now I would like to somehow discuss these thoughts with other musicians. I wish you many more incredible discoveries and see you soon.